November 22nd, 1944. 10:47 in the morning. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Forward Command Post, Reims, France. General Dwight David Eisenhower sits alone in his office on the second floor of a requisitioned French schoolhouse. The coffee in his cup went cold an hour ago. Outside, rain hammers against the tall windows with the kind of relentless intensity that turns roads into rivers and stops armies in their tracks. It's been raining for 6 days straight. The kind of November weather that makes men question why they ever left home. Eisenhower is 54 years old, Supreme Commander of all Allied forces in Western Europe, responsible for 3 million men spread across France, Belgium, and the approaches to Germany. Right now, he's reviewing supply distribution reports for the winter campaign, fuel allocations, ammunition requisitions, the endless mathematics of modern war. His pen moves across the page, signing another form. His mind is already calculating December's needs. How many tons of gasoline for Third Army? How many artillery shells for First Army? How many winter uniforms before the real cold arrives? The door opens. Captain Harry Butcher enters without knocking. Butcher never enters without knocking, not unless something urgent has happened, something that can't wait for protocol. Eisenhower looks up. His aide's face is carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that means the news is significant. Good or bad, Eisenhower can't yet tell. "General," Butcher says. His voice is steady, professional. "Third Army is reporting from Nancy. Fort Driant surrendered this morning. Metz is ours." For a long moment, Eisenhower doesn't move. His pen stops mid-signature. He sets it down on the desk with deliberate care. The kind of care a man uses when he's trying to give his brain time to process information that doesn't make sense. He stares at Butcher. "That's impossible." The words come out flat. Not a question, a statement of fact, an assertion that reality has somehow made an error. Eisenhower reaches for the calendar on his desk, flips back through the pages. November 8th. That's when Patton started the assault on Metz. Eisenhower counts the days. Once. Then again to be certain. 14 days. He pulls open his desk drawer and removes a thick folder marked with red diagonal stripes. Classified. British Joint Intelligence Committee. Assessment of Fortress Metz. Dated October 18th, 1944. He opens it to the summary page. The words are familiar. He's read them a dozen times, but now they read like fiction. Eisenhower reads aloud, his voice quiet, almost to himself. Fortress Metz represents the most formidable defensive position between the Rhine and Paris. Direct assault not recommended. Estimated duration for conventional siege operations, 180 days minimum. Projected casualties, 45,000 to 55,000. Force requirements. Minimum, 8 divisions with full air support. Recommendation, bypass and contain. He looks up at Butcher. British intelligence estimated 6 months minimum. Patton's been at it for 14 days. Butcher says nothing. Sometimes silence is the only appropriate response. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window, watches the rain. His reflection stares back at him from the glass. A man caught between relief and something harder to name. Concern, perhaps. Or the uncomfortable realization that everything he thought he understood about this war might need recalculating. "Get me the full report," Eisenhower says, "and get Smith in here, now." 6 weeks earlier, October 7th, 1944. The same office, different weather. Autumn sun streaming through the windows. Eisenhower sits at the head of a long table. Around him, the architects of Allied strategy in Western Europe. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, commander of 21st Army Group. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commander of 12th Army Group, and Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., commander of 3rd Army. 3 men, 3 very different philosophies of war. Montgomery is 57 years old, methodical, precise, a man who believes that wars are won through careful planning and overwhelming preparation. He wears his trademark black beret. His uniform is immaculate, every button in place, every crease sharp enough to cut. He speaks with the clipped certainty of a man who has studied every military manual ever written and found them all to be correct. Patton is 59, tall, ramrod straight, 2 ivory-handled revolvers on his belt. His uniform is theatrical, polished to a mirror shine. He believes that wars are won through speed and aggression and the willingness to do what cautious men call impossible. He doesn't just read military history, he believes he lived it in past lives. Ancient Rome, the Napoleonic Wars. He speaks about cavalry charges and tank assaults with the same romantic fervor. Eisenhower knows both men intimately, their strengths, their weaknesses, their egos. Managing them is like managing fire and ice, both essential, both dangerous if not controlled. On the table between them, a map of northeastern France. The Allied line stretches from the North Sea to Switzerland. They've liberated Paris, crossed the Seine, pushed the Germans back to their own border. But now, in October, the advance has stalled. Not from German strength, but from Allied logistics. They've outrun their supply lines. Every gallon of fuel has to be trucked 300 miles from Normandy beaches. Montgomery speaks first. He always speaks first. The northern route remains the priority, he says. His finger traces a line on the map from Belgium toward the Ruhr. A single concentrated thrust, overwhelming force at one point. We can be across the Rhine by Christmas if we commit fully. Patton leans back in his chair. He's heard this argument before. Market Garden, Montgomery's grand plan to end the war by Christmas, failed spectacularly just 3 weeks ago. 30,000 casualties. The British 1st Airborne Division nearly destroyed at Arnhem. Montgomery's caution, Patton believes, masquerading as strategy. A single thrust, Patton says. The words drip with skepticism. We tried that at Arnhem. How'd that work out? Montgomery's jaw tightens. Market Garden was compromised by intelligence failures and inadequate American support on the southern flank. Market Garden failed, Patton interrupts, because we gave the Germans time to prepare. We telegraphed every move. Caution doesn't win wars, Bernard. Aggression does. Eisenhower raises a hand. The argument is familiar. He's refereed this fight 100 times. Gentlemen, he says. His voice is measured, diplomatic, the tone of a man trying to hold together an alliance that depends on British pride and American ambition coexisting. We're not here to relitigate Market Garden. We're here to plan the winter campaign. Bradley, quieter than the other two, more political, spreads his hands over the map. The real problem is supply, he says. We can't support major offensives on both northern and southern axes, not with current logistics. We have to choose. Montgomery seizes the opening. Precisely my point. Concentrate everything on the northern route. British Second Army with American Ninth Army in support. We can... What about Metz? Patton interrupts. The room goes quiet. Eisenhower looks at the map. The city of Metz sits on the Moselle River, 30 miles inside France, directly in Third Army's path toward the Saar region and the German industrial heartland beyond. Metz, fortress city, unconquered for 2,000 years. Julius Caesar laid siege to it in 52 BC and took 6 months to starve it out. The Germans fortified it between 1870 and 1916. 28 interconnected forts, concentric rings of defense, 10-foot-thick concrete walls, underground tunnels connecting multiple strongpoints, artillery positions that could hit targets 15 miles away. What about Metz? Eisenhower asks, though he knows where this is going. Patton leans forward. His eyes are bright, intense. The look of a man who's already decided on a course of action and is simply waiting for permission. Give me 2 weeks and adequate supplies, Patton says. I'll take Metz. Open the road to the Saar. We'll be across the Rhine before Montgomery gets his morning tea organized. Montgomery actually laughs. A short, sharp sound without humor. 2 weeks, he repeats. George, Metz has never fallen to direct assault. Not in 2 millennia. The fortifications are... I don't care what they are, Patton says. His voice is hard now, cold. I care what they will be. Captured by Third Army in 2 weeks. Eisenhower feels the familiar tension building. the clash of philosophies. Montgomery believes in what the manuals say is possible. Patton believes in what he personally can achieve. Both have been right. Both have been catastrophically wrong. The British assessment, Montgomery continues, pulling a folder from his briefcase, which I've reviewed extensively, estimates that a conventional siege of Metz would require 6 months minimum, 40 to 50,000 casualties, and that assumes favourable weather and no interference from German reinforcements.
Then it's a good thing, Patton says, smiling now, the predator's smile, that I don't plan a conventional siege.
Eisenhower intervenes before Montgomery can respond. "George," he says quietly, "Metz can wait. I need Third Army to contain it. Fix the German forces there, prevent them from reinforcing other sectors. But I can't authorize a full-scale assault, not with winter coming, not with supply constraints." Patton's smile vanishes. His jaw sets in that stubborn line Eisenhower knows too well. "Ike, I can take it. 2 weeks, maybe less." "The answer is no," Eisenhower says, firm now, final. "Contain it. Don't assault it. That's an order." The meeting continues for another hour. Routes of advance, supply allocations, timelines. But Eisenhower can see Patton's mind is elsewhere, already planning, already calculating, already deciding which orders he'll follow and which he'll creatively reinterpret. After the others leave, Bradley lingers.
"He's going to attack anyway," Bradley says quietly.
"You know that." Eisenhower does know that. He's known George Patton for 30 years, since they were young officers together. Patton doesn't disobey orders explicitly, he just finds ways to accomplish what he wants while technically following instructions. "Then we'll deal with it when it happens," Eisenhower says. But he doesn't sound convinced.
October 18th, 1944.
London. The headquarters of British Joint Intelligence Committee. Brigadier Kenneth Strong sits in a windowless conference room surrounded by maps, photographs, and architectural drawings. Strong is a career intelligence officer, methodical, analytical, a man who trusts data over intuition. For the past 6 weeks, he and his team have been preparing the most comprehensive assessment of Fortress Metz ever compiled. The walls of the room are covered with photographs, aerial reconnaissance showing the 28 forts that ring the city, concentric circles of defensive positions. Each fort is a self-contained strongpoint, concrete and steel, designed to withstand artillery bombardment, connected by underground tunnels that allow defenders to shift forces without exposure to fire. Strong reviews the numbers one more time. German garrison strength, estimated 15,000 men, well supplied, well trained. Commanded by experienced officers who've been fortifying these positions for 4 years. Defensive depth, 3 concentric rings. The outer ring of forts sits 5 miles from the city centre, the middle ring at 3 miles, the inner ring directly adjacent to urban areas. Artillery. Over 200 guns, ranging from 75mm to 280mm railway guns. Interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. Historical precedent. Every major assault on Metz in 2,000 years has ended in either prolonged siege or outright failure. The Germans held it against French attacks in 1870 for over 2 months. In World War I, the French besieged it for 4 months and never took it. The Germans surrendered it only as part of the general armistice. Strong writes his conclusion with care. These words will inform Allied strategy. Lives depend on getting this right.
Fortress Metz represents the most formidable defensive position between the Rhine and Paris.
The fortifications are extensive, overlapping, and mutually supporting. Direct assault is not recommended under any circumstances. Estimated timeline for conventional siege operations, 180 days minimum, assuming continuous air support and no interference from German reinforcements. Projected casualties, 45,000 to 55,000. Force requirements, minimum 8 divisions with full artillery support. Strategic recommendation, bypass Metz entirely. Contain German forces within the fortress complex and advance along alternate axes. He signs the document, sends it through channels to Supreme Headquarters. The assessment is 47 pages long. Charts, graphs, historical analysis, engineering specifications, intelligence estimates. Every word of it is carefully researched, professionally prepared.
Backed by centuries of military history and current reconnaissance data. Every word of it assumes that the commander who receives it will follow conventional doctrine. None of it accounts for George Patton.
November 1st, 1944. Nancy, France, 3rd Army Headquarters. Patton stands in his office surrounded by maps. He hasn't slept in 3 days. His eyes are bloodshot. His uniform, usually immaculate, is rumpled. Coffee cups cover every flat surface. On the wall, a detailed map of Metz. The 28 forts marked in red, the Moselle River snaking through the terrain, the approach routes, the German defensive positions. Patton has been studying this map for 6 weeks. Since the day Eisenhower told him to contain Metz, not assault it. He's made his decision. Major General Walton Walker, commander of 10th Corps, stands beside him. Walker is 54 years old, a career officer, loyal to Patton in the way soldiers are loyal to commanders who win battles and bring them home alive. But even Walker looks uncertain right now. "General," Walker says carefully, "the British assessment is pretty clear. 6 months minimum, 40,000 casualties. They're recommending bypass."
Patton doesn't look away from the map. "The British," he says slowly, "said the Africa Corps couldn't be beaten in open desert, said Sicily would take 6 months, said the breakout from Normandy was impossible without Montgomery's help. The British are very good at explaining why things can't be done. Sir, Metz is different. 28 forts, concrete and steel. This isn't open terrain where we can maneuver." Patton finally turns, looks Walker in the eye. "Walton, do you know what those forts are? They're prisons. The Germans locked themselves inside, thinking walls would keep us out. But walls work both ways. They can't maneuver either, can't retreat, can't adapt. They're fixed, predictable, and anything predictable can be defeated." Walker considers this. "What's the plan?" Patton's finger traces the map. "Not one fort, not a sequence, all of them. We hit them everywhere at once. They're expecting conventional siege. Isolate each fort, reduce them one at a time over months. Instead, we attack all 28 simultaneously, or as close to simultaneously as we can manage. They won't know where to concentrate their defense, won't know which attacks are feints and which are real. We keep the pressure constant, 24 hours a day, no rest, no pause. We don't give them time to think, time to coordinate, time to organize counterattacks. That violates every principle of siege warfare," Walker says quietly. "Yes," Patton agrees, "it does." There's a long silence. Rain drums against the windows. Outside, 3rd Army prepares for winter. Men dig in, fortify positions, the kind of defensive posture that precedes months of static warfare. "How long?" Walker finally asks. 2 weeks, Patton says, "maybe less." Walker stares at him. "The British say 6 months with 8 divisions. You're saying 2 weeks with ex-10th Corps?" "I'm saying the British are calculating what's safe. I'm calculating what's possible. There's a difference. If this goes wrong, it won't. Sir, if we get 10th Corps pinned down outside Metz in November, in this weather, with winter coming, then I'll hand Eisenhower my resignation myself," Patton interrupts. "But it won't come to that. Trust me, Walton, I've been doing this my whole life. Multiple lives, actually, if you believe in that sort of thing. And I'm telling you, Metz will fall. Fast." Walker knows better than to argue further. When Patton gets this look in his eyes, this absolute certainty, there's no point in debate. "When do we start?" he asks. "November 8th, Patton says. 0530 hours. Full assault. Every fort. Simultaneously. That's in 7 days. Then we'd better get moving." After Walker leaves, Patton remains at his desk. What Walker doesn't know, what nobody except Patton's intelligence officer knows, is that 3rd Army has had reconnaissance teams inside Metz for 2 months. Not official missions. Patton didn't request permission because he knew the answer would be no. In late August, while everyone else was celebrating the liberation of Paris, Patton sent 3 French resistance operatives into Metz with specific instructions. Count the defenders, map the supply routes, assess morale.
The reports came back in October. German garrison, 9,000, not 15,000. Ammunition, rationed, not abundant. Morale, low, especially among conscripts from occupied territories. Patton kept those reports to himself, didn't share them with Schaeff, didn't include them in his planning documents. Because the moment he shared intelligence suggesting Metz was weaker than estimated, someone would authorize the assault. And Patton wanted to choose his own timing. That's the difference between following orders and winning wars. Sometimes you need information nobody else has, and sometimes you need to keep that information private until the moment is right.
November 8th is the right moment. Patton pulls out a piece of paper, begins writing. A letter to his wife, Beatrice. He writes to her often, letters that would shock his public persona. Thoughtful, reflective, vulnerable in ways he never allows himself to be with other officers. Darling B, he writes, in 7 days I'm going to do something that every expert says is impossible. I'm either going to prove them all wrong, or I'm going to end my career in spectacular fashion. Probably both, knowing my luck. But I can't not do this. Can't play it safe when I know there's a better way. If something happens to me, tell our children that their father died trying to save lives by ending this war faster, not by following rules that were written by men who never had to take Metz in November with a ticking clock and limited supplies. I love you. Wish me luck. I'm going to need it. George. He seals the letter, sets it aside for the morning courier. Then he returns to his maps. There's work to do. 7 days to plan what the British say would take 6 months. November 5th, 1944. A parallel moment. 2 different headquarters, 2 different philosophies. In London, Montgomery sits in his office reviewing plans for the Northern Offensive. His maps are covered with neat arrows, timelines, supply calculations, every detail accounted for, every contingency planned. He's requesting additional American divisions to support 21st Army Group. More fuel, more ammunition, more time to ensure success. His Chief of Staff asks when they'll be ready to resume offensive operations. Late December, Montgomery says. Possibly January. We need to rebuild supplies first, ensure proper preparation. The weather must improve. Rushing leads to failures like Market Garden. This time, we do it properly. In Nancy, Patton gathers his division commanders. Major General Harry Twaddle of 95th Infantry Division. Major General Leroy Irwin of 5th Infantry Division. Both men are experienced, combat-tested, but both look skeptical when Patton lays out the plan. Sir, Twaddle says carefully, this plan calls for assaulting fortified positions that British intelligence says would require months of artillery preparation. We're supposed to do it in days, in November, in the rain. That's correct, Patton says. With all respect, General, the casualty projections are based on conventional siege tactics, Patton interrupts. Slow, methodical, giving the enemy time to prepare, time to reinforce, time to coordinate. We're not giving them time. We're not giving them anything except violence and speed and constant pressure until they break. And if they don't break? Irwin asks. Patton looks at him, really looks at him. The kind of look that reminds junior officers that this man commanded tanks across North Africa, drove across Sicily in 38 days, liberated France faster than any army in history. They'll break, Patton says quietly. Everyone breaks eventually. The question is how long it takes. Conventional siege? 6 months, they might hold, maybe longer. But 48 hours of continuous assault, 72 hours without sleep, no time to eat, no time to rest, just constant incoming fire and infantry attacks, and the knowledge that we're coming from every direction at once? They'll break in days, not months. Psychology, gentlemen. We're not just fighting their fortifications, we're fighting their will, and will breaks faster than concrete. The room is silent. These men have seen Patton be right when everyone else was wrong enough times that they've learned to trust him, even when trust requires a leap of faith. November 8th, Patton says, 0530 hours. Weather report says rain for the next 2 weeks. Perfect.
They'll think we're insane to attack in this, which means they won't be ready. Questions? No one speaks. Good. Gentlemen, in 14 days, Metz will be ours.
And we'll have rewritten every textbook on siege warfare. Dismissed. After they leave, Patton stands at his window, watching the rain, knowing that somewhere in Reims, Eisenhower is reading reports and making calculations, and probably worrying about what Third Army might do. Patton smiles. Ike worries too much, always has. That's what makes him a good Supreme Commander. Someone has to worry about the politics, the alliance, the bigger picture. But someone also has to win battles, and Patton knows which role he prefers. November 7th, 1944, the night before. The last night before everything changes. Third Army positions outside Metz. Thousands of men huddled in rain-soaked foxholes and forward assembly areas. They know something is coming. The build-up has been impossible to miss. Artillery moving into position, ammunition stocks brought forward, officers studying maps with unusual intensity. The veterans, the ones who've been with Third Army since North Africa, recognize the signs. Patton is planning something big, something fast, something that will probably work, but might also get them all killed. They check their weapons, write letters home, try to sleep in the cold and wet. In his headquarters, Patton makes a final tour of his command post. Everything is ready. The artillery fire plans, the infantry assault routes, the timing sequences that will put pressure on all 28 forts within the first 12 hours. He returns to his office, opens his personal diary. The entry is brief. Tomorrow, we attempt what every expert says is impossible. Metz in 2 weeks. They'll say I'm reckless, arrogant, that I'm risking ex-death corps for personal glory. Let them say what they want. History will judge results, not caution. In 36 hours, either I'll be vindicated or I'll be finished. There's a certain clarity in that. No middle ground, just success or failure, win or resign. I prefer it that way. Ambiguity is for politicians. GSP. He closes the diary, checks his watch. 2200 hours, 7.5 hours until H hour. He should sleep, but he won't. He never sleeps before major operations. Too much energy, too much anticipation, the feeling of standing on the edge of something significant. Instead, he walks out into the rain, down to the forward positions, unannounced, unescorted, just a general in a raincoat moving among his men. They're surprised to see him. Officers scramble to attention. Patton waves them off. As you were, he says, just checking on my soldiers. He stops at a foxhole where 3 privates huddle under a tarp. Kids, really. None of them older than 22. Scared, but trying not to show it. You boys ready? Patton asks. One of them, braver than the others, speaks up. Sir, are we really attacking those forts tomorrow? We are, Patton says. They say those forts are impossible to take. Patton crouches down, gets on their level, looks them in the eye. Son, do you know what impossible means? It means nobody's figured out how to do it yet. Doesn't mean it can't be done, just means it hasn't been. Every fort in history was impossible until someone took it. Every battle ever won was impossible until someone won it. Tomorrow, we're going to do something that'll be in history books. And years from now, when people ask you what you did in the war, you'll tell them you were there when Third Army took Metz in 2 weeks. When everyone said it would take 6 months. That's what you'll tell your grandchildren. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He stands, moves on to the next position, and the next, spending the night with his soldiers, reminding them what they're fighting for, who they're fighting for, and reminding himself. In Reims, Eisenhower sits alone in his office. He's received intelligence that Third Army is preparing for offensive operations. The scale of the preparation suggests something more than reconnaissance in force, something more than containing Metz. He considers calling Patton, reiterating his orders, making it explicitly clear that a full assault on Metz is not authorized. But he doesn't make the call. Part of him, the part that won in North Africa and Sicily and Normandy, wants to see what Patton will do, wants to see if the impossible might actually be possible. The other part, the Supreme Commander responsible for millions of lives and the alliance with Britain, knows he should stop this before it starts. He compromises. Does nothing. Tomorrow, he'll see what Third Army reports. Then he'll decide. It's a gamble. But this entire war has been a gamble. One more roll of the dice won't change that. The clock on his wall reads 23:45. Midnight approaches. November 8th will arrive in 15 minutes. In Nancy, Patton checks his watch. Same time. He walks back to his headquarters. His uniform is soaked through. He doesn't care. In 7 hours and 45 minutes, the artillery will open fire. In 8 hours, infantry will assault positions that haven't fallen to direct attack in 2,000 years. He allows himself one moment of doubt. One brief second where he wonders if maybe, just maybe, the experts are right and he's wrong. Then, the moment passes.
He's bet his career on being right when experts were wrong too many times to doubt now. November 8th arrives. The rain continues. The night is black, moonless, cold. At 05:30 precisely, Third Army's artillery opens fire on all 28 forts simultaneously. The siege of Metz begins. Not in 6 months, not in 180 days, but in a coordinated, violent, continuous assault that will last exactly 14 days. And in Reims, when the reports start arriving at dawn, Eisenhower will read them and realize that George Patton has done it again. Disobeyed orders, followed his instincts, committed Third Army to an operation that will either end in spectacular victory or catastrophic defeat. There will be no middle ground, just success or failure, impossible or inevitable. And for the next 2 weeks, Eisenhower will wait, watch, hope, and prepare himself to either congratulate a genius or relieve a reckless fool. The difference between those two outcomes will be measured in days, in casualties, in whether Metz falls or holds. Everything hinges on the next 14 days. Everything changes on November 8th, 1944, the day George Patton decided that impossible was just another word for challenge. November 8th, 1944, 05:30 hours. The Moselle River Valley, darkness, rain, cold that cuts through every layer of clothing. Then light, not dawn. Artillery, 250 guns open fire simultaneously. The sound is physical, a pressure wave that hammers eardrums and shakes the ground. Shells arc through the black sky, trailing fire. They fall on 28 forts scattered across 30 square miles, on concrete bunkers and steel observation posts, and underground command centers that have stood for 70 years. The barrage lasts exactly 45 minutes. Not the days-long preparation that doctrine recommends. Not the careful, methodical pounding meant to soften defenses before infantry assault. 45 minutes. Then silence. Then the infantry goes in. At 06:15, as weak grey light seeps through the rain clouds, American soldiers move forward. 5th Infantry Division toward Fort Driant on the western approaches, 95th Infantry Division toward the northern forts. Smaller units toward every other position in the defensive ring. Everywhere at once. In the German bunkers, commanders try to assess the situation. They've trained for siege, prepared for the kind of methodical assault that characterized World War I. Weeks of artillery, slow advances, time to shift forces to threatened sectors. This is something else entirely. Reports flood into the central command post in Metz. Fort Driant under attack, Fort Jeanne d'Arc under attack, Fort Saint-Quentin under attack. All the outer ring positions reporting contact. General Heinrich Kittel, 58 years old, veteran of the Eastern Front, commander of the Metz garrison, stands in his underground headquarters reading the reports. He's a professional, competent, experienced, but this pattern doesn't match anything in his training. "Where is the main effort?" he asks his operations officer. "Unknown, sir. All positions report equal intensity." That's impossible. They can't sustain full-scale assaults on all sectors. There must be a main effort and supporting attacks. "Sir, all sector commanders report full infantry assaults, supported by armor and artillery." Kittel studies the map. In conventional siege doctrine, the attacker concentrates force at one point, breaks through, exploits. But the Americans are spread across the entire perimeter. It's tactically unsound, violates every principle of concentration of force, unless the goal isn't to break through. The goal is to prevent the defenders from concentrating their own forces, to keep everyone fixed in position, to create a psychological effect rather than a physical penetration. Send a priority message to Army Group G, Kittel orders. Request immediate reinforcement. American Third Army has commenced full-scale assault on Fortress Metz. The message goes out, through military channels, up the chain of command.
It will reach Berlin by afternoon. But on the ground, in the rain and mud, soldiers on both sides are already learning that this battle won't follow conventional patterns. November 8th, 1000 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Reims. Lieutenant General Walter Bedell Smith enters Eisenhower's office carrying a folder. Smith is 59 years old, Eisenhower's chief of staff, a man not given to dramatic gestures, but his face is carefully neutral, the kind of neutral that precedes bad news. "Sir," Smith says, "Third Army Operations Report." Eisenhower takes the folder, opens it, reads the first line. X-10th Corps initiated full-scale offensive operations against Fortress Metz at 0530 hours this date. Eisenhower reads it again, then a third time. The words don't change. Full-scale offensive operations. Not reconnaissance in force, not limited probing attacks. Full-scale offensive. "When did the authorization for this come through?" Eisenhower asks quietly. "It didn't, sir." There it is. The confirmation of what Eisenhower already knew. George Patton has launched a major offensive without permission, committed an entire corps to an operation that Supreme Headquarters explicitly prohibited. Eisenhower should be furious, should be on the phone right now, relieving Patton of command, should be sending Bradley to Nancy to take personal control of Third Army. Instead, he asks, "What are they reporting?" Smith flips through the pages. Initial contact at all major fortification points. 5th Division reports penetration of outer defenses at Fort Drian. 95th Division engaged at multiple northern sector positions. Casualties light so far. Weather conditions poor. No air support available. They're attacking in this weather? Apparently so, sir. Eisenhower stands, walks to the window. The rain hasn't stopped in a week. Ground conditions are impossible. Air support grounded. Artillery observation difficult. Every condition that military doctrine says makes offensive operations inadvisable. And Patton attacked anyway. "Get me a direct line to Third Army Headquarters," Eisenhower says.
"Sir, General Patton is forward with 10th Corps, not available for..." "Then get me Walker. Get me whoever's running operations. I want to talk to someone who can explain what the hell George thinks he's doing." The call goes through. Eisenhower speaks with Major General Walton Walker. The conversation is brief, professional. Eisenhower keeps his voice level, controlled. The anger underneath is visible only to Smith, who's worked with him long enough to recognize the signs. After hanging up, Eisenhower turns to Smith. Walker says this is a reconnaissance in force that developed into a meeting engagement. Says Patton is exploiting tactical opportunities as they arise. Says casualties are acceptable and progress is ahead of schedule. "Do you believe him?" Smith asks. "Not for a second," Eisenhower says. "George planned this, probably weeks ago. This is a deliberate offensive. He's betting he can take Metz fast enough that the results will justify the insubordination." "Orders, sir?" This is the moment, the decision point. Eisenhower can order Third Army to halt operations immediately, pull back to defensive positions, relieve Patton for disobeying orders, reassert control over the chain of command, or he can wait, see what happens, give Patton rope to either pull himself up or hang himself. "How long before we know if this is working?" Eisenhower asks. Smith considers. "Conventional siege of fortified positions? We'd expect minimal progress in the first week. Real assessment wouldn't be possible for 10 to 14 days. "Give him until November 15th, Eisenhower says. 1 week. If Third Army isn't showing clear progress by then, I shut it down. And George can explain to Marshall why he disobeyed a direct order from his supreme commander." Smith nods, makes notes. After he leaves, Eisenhower sits alone.
He should call Montgomery, inform him of the situation. But he knows what Montgomery will say, that this proves Patton is reckless. The resources should be concentrated in the north under proper command. And Montgomery might be right. But Eisenhower has known George Patton for 3 decades, has watched him do impossible things before. Sicily, the breakout from Normandy, the race across France. Every time, the experts said it couldn't be done. Every time, Patton did it anyway. So, Eisenhower waits. 1 week. 7 days to see if genius looks different from madness. November 9th, 1944. Evening. 3rd Army Sector. The rain continues, visibility less than 100 yards. The ground is churned to mud, vehicles bog down, men slip and slide. Conditions are miserable, and 3rd Army keeps attacking. 24 hours into the operation, the pattern is clear. No pause, no consolidation, no time to rest and regroup, just constant pressure. Infantry assaults supported by armor. Artillery fire on any position that shows resistance. Movement forward measured in yards, but movement everywhere. The German defenders are exhausted. They've been under attack for 24 hours straight. No sleep. Minimal food. The Americans rotate units. Fresh troops relieving those who've been in contact. But the defenders can't rotate, can't pull back. They're fixed in concrete bunkers with nowhere to go. Fort Drian, the western anchor of the outer defensive ring. The fort sits on high ground overlooking the Moselle. 60 feet of earth and concrete. Gun positions covering all approaches. Underground barracks, ammunition storage, command post. The fort has never fallen to assault. Never. Major General Leroy Irwin, commanding 5th Infantry Division, establishes his forward command post 300 yards from the fort's outer walls. He's 51 years old, combat veteran, pragmatic, not given to theatrics. But even he's surprised by what he's watching. His men aren't following siege doctrine. They're not establishing positions for a prolonged bombardment. They're assaulting, directly, using smoke for concealment, Bangalore torpedoes to breach wire obstacles, flamethrowers to clear bunkers, close assault tactics that military manuals say don't work against fortified positions. Except they're working. Not because the tactics are overwhelming the defenses, but because the defenders aren't prepared for this kind of aggression. They're waiting for the pattern they trained for. Artillery preparation, infantry probes, gradual pressure over weeks. Instead, it's been 24 hours of continuous violence, and the psychological impact is exceeding the physical damage. Irwin receives a report from his lead battalion commander. "Sir, we've penetrated the outer defenses. Bangalore teams breached the wire. We're inside the perimeter. Casualties? Moderate, maybe 30%, but we're in." 30% casualties would normally trigger a withdrawal, consolidation, waiting for reinforcements. But Irwin has his orders from Patton. "Keep moving, don't give them time to recover." "Push forward," he orders. "I want to be inside those inner works by dawn." At the German garrison headquarters in Metz, General Kittel reviews the situation reports. 48 hours into the battle, every outer fort is engaged. Several report American penetration of perimeter defenses. Casualties mounting, ammunition expenditure at rates that can't be sustained. He drafts a message to Army Group G. "Situation critical. American assault unconventional and sustained. Request immediate reinforcement and resupply." The response arrives 6 hours later. "Reinforcements not available. Hold current positions. Fortress Metz must be maintained as anchor of Western defensive line." Kittel reads the message twice, then sets it aside. He's a professional soldier. He'll follow orders, but he's also a realist. Mathematics don't lie. The Americans are attacking with 2 divisions, maybe 25,000 men. His garrison numbers 9,000. In conventional siege, the defender has advantage, protected positions, prepared fields of fire, supply stocks. But the Americans aren't fighting a conventional siege. They're fighting something else, something that looks more like a continuous assault. No breaks, no pauses, pressure everywhere, simultaneously. And his men are breaking faster than the fortifications. November 11th, 1944, London. Field Marshal Montgomery sits in his office reviewing intelligence summaries.
The report from France catches his attention. American Third Army engaged in offensive operations against Fortress Metz. Duration, 3 days. Progress, multiple outer defensive positions penetrated. Casualties, estimated 3,000. Montgomery sets down the report, does the calculation. 3,000 casualties in 3 days. That's 1,000 per day. Projected over 6 months, the British estimate that would be 180,000 casualties. Completely unsustainable. He drafts a message to Eisenhower. Reports indicate Third Army has initiated major offensive against Metz. Weather conditions unsuitable for offensive operations. Casualties mounting at unsustainable rate. Recommend immediate halt and reassessment.
Resources currently committed to Third Army operations would be better employed supporting 21st Army Group Northern Offensive. The message is professional, measured, but the subtext is clear. Patton is being reckless again. This adventure will end in disaster, and Montgomery's methodical approach will be proven correct. Montgomery sends the message, then returns to his own planning. The Northern Offensive will launch in late December, properly prepared, adequately supplied, following doctrine. The right way to fight a war.
November 13th, 1944. Third Army Headquarters, Nancy. Patton reads Montgomery's message. The corners of his mouth twitch, not quite a smile, something harder. He drafts a response, then deletes it, drafts another, deletes that too. Finally, he writes, Third Army operations proceeding according to plan. Casualties within acceptable parameters. Fortress Metz outer ring nearly penetrated. Estimate completion within 1 week. He signs it, sends it, then turns to his operations map. 5 days into the assault. The outer ring of forts is crumbling. Not from overwhelming firepower, but from exhaustion. Forts designed to withstand months of bombardment are surrendering after days of continuous pressure. Fort Driant hasn't fallen yet, but it's surrounded, cut off. The garrison is still fighting, but they're fighting without hope of relief. Patton's Chief of Staff enters. Sir, we're receiving inquiries from SHAEF. They want daily casualty reports.
Ammunition expenditure rates. Assessment of probability of success.
Tell them we'll have Metz in 9 days, Patton says. Sir, that's 9 days, Patton repeats. Maybe less. After his staff officer leaves, Patton pulls out his diary. The entry is brief. Day 5. Montgomery thinks I'm failing. Eisenhower is probably wondering if he should relieve me. The Germans are wondering why we won't stop attacking. My men are wondering if I've lost my mind. But the forts are falling. Not because we're stronger. Because they can't comprehend fighting this way. Speed, aggression, momentum. These aren't just tactics, they're weapons. And we're using them better than anyone thought possible.
November 16th, 1944. Berlin.
Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations Staff, presents a situation briefing to Adolf Hitler. The map shows the Western Front, every sector marked with unit positions, supply routes, defensive lines. Jodl's finger traces to Metz. Mein Führer, Fortress Metz is under sustained assault. American Third Army, 8 days duration. Multiple outer forts have fallen or are surrounded. Hitler's hand slams on the table. The sound echoes in the bunker conference room. 8 days? Metz was designed to withstand months of siege. We fortified it for 70 years. How does it fall in 8 days? The American commander is not conducting a conventional siege, Jodl explains carefully. He's attacking simultaneously across all sectors, maintaining continuous pressure. The garrison is exhausted, ammunition stocks depleting faster than anticipated due to constant engagement. Which American commander? Third Army.
General Patton. Hitler stands, walks to the map, studies it. His finger traces the line from Metz eastward toward the Saar River, toward the German border, toward the industrial heartland. This is the same Patton who raced across Sicily? Who broke out from Normandy? Yes, mein Führer. Hitler turns to face Jodl directly. His eyes are intense, almost feverish. Stop him. Pull units from 15th Army if necessary. Pull them from the Ardennes reserves if you must. Whatever it costs, Third Army must be stopped at Metz. Mein Führer, the Ardennes reserves are designated for the winter offensive. I know what they're designated for, Hitler interrupts. But if Patton breaks through at Metz, if he reaches the Tsar before we launch the offensive, the entire strategic situation changes. Stop him, now. The order goes out. Units are redeployed. Not to reinforce Metz, it's too late for that, but to establish defensive positions east of the city, to prepare for what comes after Metz falls. Because in Berlin, unlike in London, they understand what's happening. Metz isn't holding, Metz is falling. The only question is when, and what Patton will do next. November 18th, 1944. Fort Jeanne d'Arc, northern sector. The fort has been under continuous assault for 10 days. The defenders are down to half strength. Wounded men who should be in hospitals are fighting from bunker positions. Ammunition is rationed, food is scarce, but they're still fighting, still holding. At 0400 hours, American artillery opens fire. Not the usual pattern. This is different, heavier, more concentrated. The barrage lasts 2 hours. At 0600, infantry attacks from 3 directions simultaneously. Smoke obscures the approaches. Flamethrower teams target bunker apertures. Engineers place explosive charges on steel doors. The fort commander, a captain named Weber, 32 years old, watches from the central observation post. He's been in this fort for 10 days. Before that, he commanded a company on the Russian front. He knows what defeat looks like. This is defeat. Not because the fortifications have failed. The walls are intact. The guns still function. But his men are done. 10 days without relief. 10 days of constant attack. They're fighting on instinct now. Automatic response to training. But the will is gone. Weber makes his decision. He orders white flags displayed. The firing stops. American troops enter the fort carefully. Weapons ready. Expecting resistance. Instead, they find exhausted men who've been fighting for 10 days straight and have nothing left. The fort surrenders. 147 defenders become prisoners. The Americans count their own casualties, 38 dead, 92 wounded in 10 days of assault. The American battalion commander radios the result to division headquarters. Fort Jeanne d'Arc secured, garrison surrendered, moving to next objective. At Third Army headquarters, Patton receives the report. He marks the fort on his map with a red X. Another one down. 17 forts captured or neutralized, 11 still holding. 4 days, maybe 5, and Metz will fall. He checks his watch. 10 days since the assault began, 4 days ahead of his private estimate. Not bad for something every expert said was impossible. November 20th, 1944. German command post, Metz. General Kittel stands in his underground headquarters. The situation reports paint a clear picture. 17 of 28 forts fallen. The remaining 11 are isolated, cut off from mutual support, running low on ammunition. He's fought in 2 wars, Russia, France. He understands military mathematics. The equation is simple. His garrison can't hold, not against this kind of sustained pressure. He could fight to the last man, die defending Metz, preserve his honor according to National Socialist ideology. Or he could save lives. Kittel is 58 years old, career officer, professional soldier. He joined the army in 1904, before the Kaiser, before Hitler. He swore an oath to Germany, not to a political party. And right now, Germany needs soldiers alive more than it needs martyrs dead. He makes his decision. He will surrender Metz, save what remains of the garrison, 4,000 men, most of them young, conscripts, boys who didn't choose this war. The decision will cost him everything. In the eyes of the regime, surrendering a fortress designated as strategic anchor is treason. The penalty is death. But 4,000 lives weigh more than one. Kittel drafts the surrender offer, sends it through channels to the American command. Then he waits. He knows what comes next. Court-martial, firing squad, disgrace. In April 1945, 6 months from now, he will stand before a military tribunal in Berlin. The charge, cowardice and dereliction of duty.
The evidence, surrendering Fortress Metz after only 14 days. The sentence will be death. He will face the firing squad at dawn on April 7th, 1945. His last words will be recorded in the tribunal transcript. I regret nothing. 4,000 men lived who would have died. That is enough. But that's 6 months away. Right now, on November 20th, Kittel is simply making the hardest decision of his military career. To follow ideology or save lives. He chooses lives. And in doing so, he validates Patton's entire strategy. The goal was never to destroy the garrison through firepower. It was to break their will through psychological pressure, to make surrender seem like the rational choice. Kittel's decision proves it worked. November 22nd, 1944, 0:10:15 hours, Fort Driant. The last fort, the strongest position in the entire defensive complex. It's held out for 14 days, but this morning, white flags appear on the ramparts. General Kittel's surrender order has reached all remaining positions. The garrison is ordered to lay down arms. American troops enter Fort Driant at 0:10:15. They find 400 defenders, exhausted, starving, out of ammunition, but alive. The fort that was supposed to hold for months has fallen in 14 days. At 3rd Army headquarters, the message arrives at 0:10:30. All Metz fortifications secured. Fortress City completely captured. Operations successful. Total duration, 14 days. Total casualties, 2,897. Patton receives the message, marks the final fort on his map with a red X. 28 forts, all captured or neutralized. 14 days. November 8th to November 22nd. He picks up his telephone, calls his operations officer. Start moving 10 Corps east, he says, toward the Tsar. We've got momentum. I want to use it. Then he updates his diary. Metz secured. 14 days. Everyone said 6 months. They were wrong. I was right. Again. Now the real work begins. The Tsar, the Rhine, Germany itself. Metz wasn't the goal. It was just the obstacle they said couldn't be overcome. Time to do the next impossible thing. November 22nd, 1944. 11:47 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Reims. Eisenhower sits at his desk. The final report from 3rd Army lies open before him. Fortress Metz. Complete capture. 14 days. Casualties. 2,897. He picks up the British assessment. Opens to the projections page. Estimated duration, 180 days. Estimated casualties, 45,000 to 55,000. Estimated forces required, 8 divisions. Actual duration, 14 days. Actual casualties, 2,897. Actual forces employed, 2 divisions. The mathematics are staggering. 13 times faster than estimated. 94% fewer casualties. 75% fewer forces. These aren't margins of error. These are fundamental miscalculations about what was achievable. Eisenhower picks up the telephone, tells the operator to connect him to 3rd Army headquarters. The line rings, connects. 3rd Army, General Patton's office. This is General Eisenhower. Put him on. A pause, then that familiar voice. Ike, about time you called. Eisenhower doesn't waste words. 14 days, George. The British said 6 months. I need to understand how. There's a pause. Then Patton speaks, his voice carrying that edge of certainty. Simple. I stopped asking what the experts thought was possible and started asking what I could make happen. Turns out there's a big difference between those two questions. Eisenhower glances at the casualty figures, under 3,000. You risked everything on instinct. No, Patton corrects firmly. I risked everything on understanding what the enemy expected versus what they feared. They expected a siege. I gave them psychological warfare. Fear breaks fortresses faster than artillery, Ike. Always has. There's a long silence. Eisenhower processes this. The unconventional thinking, the disregard for doctrine, the absolute confidence. One of these days, George, your confidence will cost us more than we can afford. Not today, though, Patton replies. Another pause. Then Eisenhower speaks quietly, almost reluctantly. Keep not believing them.
But George, don't make me regret this. Too late for that, sir, Patton says. There's a hint of a smile in his voice. You made the right call letting me try. History will prove it. The line goes dead. Eisenhower sits back, stares at the map on his wall. Metz, marked in red. 14 days. He says to no one in particular, he actually did it. Smith, who's been standing quietly by the door, allows himself the slightest smile. Yes, sir, he did. And somewhere between Rems and Nancy, between Supreme Command and field operations, a question crystallizes. If Patton can do this at Metz, what else might be possible that everyone assumes is impossible? The war is about to find out. November 23, 1944. London, British Joint Intelligence Committee Headquarters. Brigadier Kenneth Strong sits at his desk, surrounded by reports from France. The final tally from Metz arrived this morning. Complete capture, 14 days. Casualties, 2,897. He pulls his own assessment from the file, the one he signed 6 weeks ago. 47 pages of professional analysis. Every word carefully researched. Every projection based on historical precedent and current intelligence. 180 days minimum. 45 to 55,000 casualties. 8 divisions required. He was wrong. Not slightly wrong. Catastrophically wrong. Strong is a professional. He doesn't make excuses. But he needs to understand what happened, why the analysis failed so completely. He begins writing his revision. These words will go to Churchill, to the War Cabinet, to Supreme Headquarters. They'll inform future operations. Assessment of Fortress Metz operation. Analysis of variance from projected outcomes. Original assessment assumed conventional siege doctrine, establishment of siege lines, systematic isolation, and reduction of strongpoints over extended period. Methodical approach minimizing friendly casualties. American Third Army under General Patton employed unconventional methodology. Simultaneous assault on all defensive positions. Continuous offensive pressure maintained 24 hours daily despite adverse weather. No operational pauses for consolidation. Psychological impact of sustained aggression appears to have exceeded physical defensive capacity of garrison. German forces, while adequately fortified, were unprepared for continuous assault without respite. Result: psychological collapse of defensive will prior to physical destruction of fortifications. Critical intelligence error. Garrison strength overestimated at 15,000. Actual strength approximately 9,000. Revision of future assessment methodology recommended. Analysis procedures must account for variable command philosophy and unconventional approaches. Strong signs the document, sends it through channels. The words are diplomatic, professional, but underneath is a simple truth. British intelligence calculated what a methodical commander following doctrine could achieve. They didn't calculate what an aggressive, instinctive commander refusing to accept limitations could achieve. The report reaches Churchill by afternoon. The Prime Minister reads it twice, then picks up the secure line to Eisenhower. "Ike," Churchill's voice rumbles through. "I'm reading Strong's revision on Metz. 14 days. Remarkable achievement." "Yes, sir," Eisenhower says carefully. "Exceeded expectations is an understatement. He shattered them, made my intelligence committee look like amateurs." There's grudging admiration in Churchill's tone. What does this tell us about future operations? That conventional thinking has limitations, sir. Indeed, I trust you're considering implications. If Metz can fall in 2 weeks instead of 6 months, what else might be achievable? I'm considering it, sir. After the call ends, Eisenhower sits with that question. What else is achievable when you stop letting expert consensus define the limits? It's an encouraging thought, and a dangerous one. November 24th, 1944. Versailles. 21st Army Group Headquarters. Field Marshal Montgomery sits in his office reading intelligence summaries, 3 pages on Metz, timeline, casualties, methods employed. He sets it down, picks up his pen, begins drafting. Not to Eisenhower, to Churchill directly. Montgomery understands how to influence decisions, how chains of command work, how to bypass channels when necessary. "Prime Minister,"
Reference Third Army operations at Metz. While rapid capture is tactically impressive, it represents dangerous deviation from sound military practice. Success in this instance does not validate methodology. General Patton's simultaneous assault on fortified positions succeeded due to factors beyond his control. German garrison weaker than estimated, ammunition shortages, weather preventing reinforcement. These variables could easily have resulted in catastrophic failure. Casualty rate, while lower than projected, remains significant for 14-day operation. Extrapolated over extended campaign, such rates would prove unsustainable. Resource allocation to Third Army operations has impacted supply availability for 21st Army Group. Recommend future offensive operations be concentrated under unified command employing conventional, proven methodologies. Respectfully, B. L. Montgomery, Field Marshal. He signs it, sends it. The memo is professional, measured. The subtext is clear. Patton was fortunate, not brilliant. Reckless, not bold. Resources should flow north under careful British command. Churchill receives it within hours. Reads it, sets it aside without immediate response. He's known Montgomery for years. Brilliant tactician, cautious to a fault, the kind of general who wins by not losing. But wars aren't won by not losing, they're won by winning. And right now, Patton is winning faster than anyone predicted. Churchill files the memo, moves on. December 2nd, 1944. Nancy, France. Third Army Headquarters. Eisenhower's aircraft lands at 0900 hours. He's flown from Reims specifically for this meeting, face to face. Not over telephone lines, not through written communications. This conversation needs to happen directly. Patton meets him at headquarters. They go to his office, close the door, just the two of them. Eisenhower doesn't sit immediately. He stands at the map wall, studies the situation, Third Army's positions, the advance toward the Saar, the momentum building. Finally, he turns, gestures to chairs. They sit. "George," Eisenhower begins, "I've read every after-action report from Metz, reviewed casualty figures, studied tactical decisions. I've also read the British assessment that said this was impossible." Patton waits, his expression neutral, respectful. "You assaulted fortified positions that should have required weeks of preparation. You attacked in weather that grounded air support. You spread 10th Corps across multiple, simultaneous objectives when doctrine says concentrate force." "Yes, sir," Patton says simply, "and it worked." "Yes, sir." Eisenhower leans forward. His voice carries weight now, authority mixed with genuine concern. "That's not the point, George." Patton's expression shifts slightly. Interest, perhaps confusion. "With respect, Ike, that's exactly the point." "No," Eisenhower says firmly. "The point is doctrine exists for reasons. Standards exist for reasons. Chain of command exists for reasons. You violated all three. If this had failed, if 10th Corps had been trapped outside Metz with winter setting in, we'd be having a very different conversation." Patton leans forward. His voice is calm but intense. "But it didn't fail, because I knew it wouldn't. Ike, doctrine is a guide, not a cage. If I'd followed doctrine, we'd still be outside Metz come March, with 10 times the casualties. And a winter campaign we'd have lost because I was too cautious to take a calculated risk in November." "Calculated?" Eisenhower's voice rises slightly. "You attacked 28 forts simultaneously in the worst weather in 50 years with 2 divisions. Every expert said it required 6 months with 8 divisions. What calculation suggested this was sound?" Patton stands, walks to his map. His finger traces the line eastward from Metz. "This calculation," he says quietly. "Every day we waited at Metz was a day the Germans strengthened positions toward the Saar. Every week of conventional siege was a week of winter making operations harder. I didn't attack to prove doctrine wrong. I attacked because speed saves lives. Taking it fast meant fewer casualties, meant maintaining momentum, meant positioning Third Army for what comes next." Eisenhower stands as well, joins him at the map. "And when the next fortress appears?"
When the next impossible objective needs taking? Do I just assume you'll disobey orders because your instinct says you're right? Patton turns, meets Eisenhower's gaze directly. If it means winning faster and saving lives, yes. The silence that follows is heavy. Two men who've known each other 30 years. Friends, colleagues, brothers in arms, but also commander and subordinate, supreme authority and field general. Finally, Eisenhower speaks. His voice is quieter now. Something shifts in his tone. "You actually did it, George." The words hang between them. Not quite congratulations. Not quite forgiveness. Something more complex. Recognition, acknowledgement. Perhaps even a hint of awe. Metz in 14 days. I didn't think it was possible. Churchill didn't think it was possible. Montgomery didn't think it was possible. British intelligence wrote 47 pages explaining why it wasn't possible. But you actually did it. Patton nods slowly. You want to know the secret, Ike? What secret? Everyone keeps telling me what's impossible. I just don't believe them. Eisenhower holds his gaze for a long moment. Then something shifts in his expression. Not quite a smile, but acceptance. Keep not believing them, George, but don't make me regret this. You won't, sir, Patton says. History will prove you made the right call. After Eisenhower leaves, Patton stands at his window, watches the aircraft take off, return to Reims, to Supreme Headquarters, to political complications and alliance management. Patton prefers this world, maps and orders and battles, things that can be won or lost, things that don't require committees. He returns to his desk, updates his diary. Ike came to Nancy, expected anger, got understanding instead. He said, "I actually did it," as if there was doubt. Metz was impossible only to people who believe in impossible. I don't. Never have. Now Third Army is positioned for the Tsar. Then the Siegfried Line, then the Rhine. One impossible thing after another until this war ends. December 16th, 1944. 05:30 hours. The Ardennes Forest. German artillery opens fire across an 80-mile front. 29 divisions, 250,000 men. The largest German offensive on the Western Front since 1940. The Battle of the Bulge begins. American units are overrun. Communication breaks down. Confusion spreads. Within 24 hours, German armored spearheads penetrate 30 miles into American lines. At Supreme Headquarters, the situation is critical. First Army is split. Isolated units surrounded. The road junction at Bastogne under siege. Eisenhower calls an emergency meeting. December 19th. Verdun. All senior commanders. Montgomery arrives. Bradley. Patton. Eisenhower presents the situation. German breakthrough. Critical positions threatened. Bastogne must be relieved or the entire southern flank collapses. How long, Eisenhower asks, before we can launch a counterattack? Montgomery spreads maps, begins calculating. Proper preparation requires 3 weeks minimum. We need to consolidate positions, establish supply lines. 3 weeks? Eisenhower interrupts. Bastogne won't hold 3 weeks. Patton speaks up. His voice is calm, certain. I can be there in 48 hours. Every head turns, stares. Montgomery actually laughs. George, Third Army is facing east toward the Saar. You're talking about pivoting 90 degrees, moving an entire army north, through winter. In 48 hours? That's impossible? Patton finishes. Yeah, I've heard that before. Eisenhower leans forward. Are you serious? You can move 3 divisions 90 degrees and attack in 2 days. 3 divisions in 48 hours, Patton confirms. 6 divisions in 72. Give the order. Montgomery shakes his head. This is madness. Army-level maneuver can't be coordinated that quickly. Logistics alone are already planned, Patton interrupts. He pulls out a folder. Maps. Movement schedules. Supply routes. I wargamed contingencies last week. This is contingency 3. Pivot north. Relieve Bastogne. Smash the southern shoulder. The room is silent. Eisenhower makes his decision. Do it. Third Army pivots north. Relieve Bastogne. 22nd December. Patton stands, salutes, leaves immediately. And Third Army, the force that took Metz in 14 days by refusing to accept impossible, pivots 90 degrees in the middle of winter in 48 hours. December 22nd, Third Army attacks into the German southern flank. December 26th, American forces break through to Bastogne. The siege is lifted. Another impossible thing accomplished. And Eisenhower, watching from headquarters, understands something fundamental. Metz wasn't just about taking a fortress. It was about proving that speed and aggression and refusing to accept limitations could win battles conventional thinking said were unwinnable. Without Metz falling fast, Third Army wouldn't have been positioned to pivot north. Without that pivot, Bastogne falls. Without Bastogne, the southern flank collapses. Metz, impossible fortress that fell in 14 days, saved the Battle of the Bulge. One impossible thing, enabling the next impossible thing.
April 1967, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Eisenhower is 76 years old, retired, former Supreme Commander, former President. A historian interviews him for a documentary. The conversation turns to commanders, leadership. Patton. General, the historian asks, Patton occupies a unique place in the narrative. Can you speak to that? Eisenhower is quiet, thinking, choosing words. George was infuriating, he finally says, insubordinate, convinced he was always right. The problem was, he usually was. He pauses, continues. Metz was supposed to be impossible. British intelligence, good people, professionals, said 6 months minimum, 40 to 50,000 casualties. They recommended bypass. George took it in 14 days with fewer than 3,000 casualties. Made it look routine. That's what made him valuable and dangerous. Dangerous how? You couldn't predict what he'd do next, but you could count on it being something everyone said couldn't be done.
That's valuable, but also terrifying when you're responsible for him. Were his methods justified? Eisenhower considers carefully. Justified? That's moral philosophy. Successful? Absolutely. George understood that psychology matters as much as firepower, that speed can be a weapon, that expert consensus isn't always correct. And if he'd been wrong, then I'd have relieved him. And he knew it. That's what people don't understand. George wasn't reckless, he was confident. There's a difference. Reckless means gambling without calculation. Confident means understanding the risks and believing you can overcome them. The historian makes notes, then asks one more question. What did Metz teach you? Eisenhower smiles, genuine, remembering that sometimes the right answer is letting brilliant people be brilliant, even when it terrifies you, even when they violate every rule. George took Metz in 14 days because I gave him Third Army and mostly got out of his way.
That's leadership, knowing when to manage and when to trust.
November 22nd, 2024, 80 years after Metz fell. At West Point, a professor of military history stands before cadets. The lecture, Operational Innovation and Doctrine, Case Study, Metz, 1944. Statistics appear on screen. British assessment, 180 days. Actual, 14 days. Projected casualties, 45 to 55,000. Actual, 2,897. Required forces, 8 divisions. Actual, 2 divisions. This isn't margin of error. This is fundamental miscalculation. Why? Hands raise. Theories offered. Intelligence failures. German weakness. The professor shakes his head. British intelligence calculated based on conventional siege doctrine. Patton didn't use conventional doctrine. He created his own. Simultaneous assault, continuous pressure, psychological warfare through operational tempo. He didn't fight the fortress. He fought the defender's will. And will breaks faster than concrete.
A cadet raises her hand.
Should we teach Patton's methods or conventional doctrine? The professor smiles. Both. Doctrine works most of the time for most commanders. It minimizes risk, provides frameworks. You need to know it, master it.
But you also need to know when doctrine limits you, when following rules means missing opportunities. Patton knew both. He knew the rules intimately. That's why he knew which to break and when. Another cadet. What if he'd been wrong? Then we'd study it as recklessness instead of brilliance. That's the difference. Results. Patton succeeded, so we call him genius. If he'd failed, we'd call him reckless. That's the risk every innovative commander accepts. The lecture continues, but the lesson remains. Sometimes impossible is just untested. December 2024. Silicon Valley. A young CEO stands before her board. Quarterly results under review. The company is burning cash. Competitors gaining ground.
The board wants pivot to proven models. The data says this won't work, a board member says. Every comparable startup failed. You should listen to experts. The CEO thinks about Metz, about a fortress standing 2,000 years, about British intelligence saying 6 months, about Patton saying 2 weeks. She makes her decision. The experts are calculating what's safe. I'm calculating what's possible. There's a difference. 3 months later, the company will either validate that confidence or prove the experts right. That's the lesson Metz teaches across 80 years. Sometimes impossible is just untested. Sometimes expert consensus is wrong. Sometimes the only way to know what's possible is trying what everyone says can't be done. But you better be right. Because history remembers Patton as genius only because Metz fell in 14 days. If it had taken 6 months and 50,000 casualties, we'd remember him as the fool who ignored expert assessment. The difference between genius and foolishness is often just results. Patton understood that, accepted it, bet his career on it, and won. At West Point, the statue stands. General George S. Patton. Ivory-handled revolvers, ramrod posture. The inscription reads, "Impossible is just untested." Cadets walk past daily. Most don't stop. It's just another monument. But some do stop. Some read the inscription. Some ask what it means. And when they learn about Metz, 14 days versus 6 months, 3,000 casualties versus 50,000, one general who refused to believe expert consensus, some internalize a different lesson than textbooks teach. They learn doctrine is tool, not cage. That expert assessment is input, not law. That conventional wisdom is convention, not wisdom. And some, years later, will face their own impossible fortresses. Their own expert assessments saying it can't be done. Their own moment when everyone counsels safety. And they'll think about Metz. About November 8th through 22nd, 1944. About the fortress that couldn't fall, but did. About the general who didn't believe in impossible. About the supreme commander who learned to trust brilliance even when it terrified him. Some will make Patton's choice. To test impossible, to challenge consensus, to bet that what everyone knows is wrong might actually be right. Some will succeed, some will fail. But all will know one truth Metz proved 80 years ago. The difference between impossible and inevitable is sometimes just someone refusing to believe the difference exists. On November 22nd, 1944, Dwight Eisenhower said, "That's impossible," and George Patton proved him wrong. 80 years later, that exchange still echoes. In command decisions, in business strategies, in personal challenges, in every moment when expert consensus meets audacious confidence. The question isn't whether to follow experts or trust instincts. The question is, do you know the difference between calculated risk and reckless gambling? Patton did. He studied the intelligence, sent reconnaissance teams, understood German weaknesses, calculated psychological impact, planned contingencies. Then, he bet everything on execution. That's not recklessness, that's confidence backed by preparation. Metz proved it. And that's why, 80 years later, we're still telling this story. Not because a fortress fell, but because someone proved impossible was negotiable and changed what we believe is possible. Forever.